Thank you for joining me here at the Real ResQ Podcast. I'm psyched about this episode because this one we get to have a conversation with two other podcasts. But first, let's drop a little shout out to our sponsor for this episode. Yep, that's Breeze Eastern, the world's only dedicated helicopter hoist and winch provider. Now, in this episode, we get to sit down with John Gray from the Hangar Z Podcast and Halsey Schider from the Helicopter Podcast. We have a great conversation and talk about a little bit of CRM with a couple other things and outside of the world that each of us are in. It was a blast. So for the first time, I hope you guys enjoy it. It's our HeliCASTS Mashup. My name is Jason Quinn. I am United States Coast Guard Rescue Swimmer number 500. These are my rescues and rescues from those of us that put our lives on the line every day so others may live. This is the Real ResQ Podcast. What's up, fellas? Good to see you today. How are you?
What's up, Quinny?
Hey, Quinny. What's going on?
This is awesome. This is a bit of a Vertical HeliCASTS Podcast Mashup. Boom!
HeliCASTS Unite.
Dude,
Coming together.
Can we get rings or something, John? Like our HeliCASTS together.
like Captain Planet style.
Yeah, totally.
Fire.
Boom. I could be water. I could literally be water. Swimmer.
I always felt bad for the one guy that was like, everyone was like, fire, wind, and then there was the guy who's like, heart.
Yeah. Like, oh,
That's funny.
Oh, that's great. Well, man, I'm psyched about this, you guys. We've had this talk for a while in the background, and it's finally come to fruition. We are going to have a conversation about crew resource management. So boring and yet so exciting. Like I specifically remember sitting out like through CRM classes, and you're just like, oh God, here we go again. But you know what? It's important, and we have an opportunity to have a couple different perspectives from each of our position in the helicopter. So I'm excited to see what we can bring to the table to give everybody out there to use and work with, and hopefully just a good information session. So it's good.
It's funny you talk about it being boring. I remember back in college, I was a sociology major, and what sociology does is take something that's very simple and makes it super complex and tries to make it scientific, almost to the point where it becomes boring. And I feel like that's what has happened in the study of CRM stuff. We take something that's really dynamic and can be really interesting, but we find a way to make it super boring. Like you sit through the CRM portions of your training, you're like, oh my gosh, feel like poking your eyes out sometimes. But it's such a critical part of what we're doing. Most of us are flying, we might be flying single pilot operations, but you still have people on board, and it's still important to know how to communicate with these folks. So anyways, I think it's funny how we tend to do that. We take something that's interesting and make it boring and overly scientific, so hopefully this is a fun conversation and not overly scientific.
Right.
I think that's the beauty with the podcast, is we can hopefully make things more kind of real life. I feel like when we're in a classroom setting, things get too scientific, or people are trying too hard to create this amazing curriculum, and they forget about actually just like sharing the stories from the perspective of the pilot, from the crew member. And so I think hopefully within this podcast, especially with you guys have a vast amount of crew resource management experience compared to me. So I'm actually excited. I feel like I'm going to gain from just being able to kind of hear what you guys have to say. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Absolutely.
That's good. You know what? I forgot to start us off, though, or we forgot to start this off. By the way, I'm Jason Quinn with the Real ResQ Podcast. What up? John, what are you representing?
I'm John Gray. I'm the host of the Hangar Z Podcast. So we represent the public safety segment. So police, fire, law enforcement, HIMS. I guess police and law enforcement is the same thing. But all the public safety segment is what the Hangar Z represents. So yeah, happy to be here with you guys.
And I'm Halsey Schider with the Helicopter Podcast.
Not Snyder.
Emphasis on Schider. And my podcast is exactly as it sounds. It's encompasses all helicopters, mainly the stories of the men and women that fly helicopters. So super excited to be part of Vertical HeliCASTS, obviously. And I think doing collaborations like this with you guys is only going to create amazing and better content for our listeners. So I love being part of this group. I don't have as much energy as Jason, admittedly. I wish I did. Like, you should sell a can of Jason energy. Like, I don't know. Like, you should have an energy drink or something. I need some of what you have.
Yeah, I'm working on a whiskey drink right now. I mean, come on.
Nice.
I gotta tone it down, man. Tone it down. Halsey, I appreciate that one, man. I like it. If I can rub off on you a little bit, we'll have some fun together. Let's just, it'll be all right. It'll be good.
Looking forward to it.
That's funny. All right, well, I'll tell you what, guys. Let's ask the first question. So, what is CRM? So, John, what is CRM to you?
And to me, it's super basic. It's just talking to people. When we're in flight, you've got to communicate, and that communication can be verbal and nonverbal, right? And the benefit that I have in law enforcement is I've got a partner that's assigned to me every day, and because I'm working every day with that same partner, we pick up on our cues. He knows what I need to do, and I know what he needs to do. A lot of times, just based off reading each other and hearing what's going on the radio, and having gone through the motions a bunch of times. A lot of times, CRM is, like I said, nonverbal. So that's as simple as it is, to me.
Yeah, it's me too. Halsey, what about you? What's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, CRM, to me, CRM can be as basic as taking a passenger in an R22, your buddy, your girlfriend, your wife, your husband. And I always used to say, like, hey, guys, 4 eyes is better than 2 eyes. So please keep an eye out. If you see anything, you see another aircraft, you see a wire, you see something, please tell me, because there's a good chance that maybe I don't see it. So I think it's as basic as that. And then I think it can become more complex where you have trained crew members. In my experience, I've flown an air medical. So I had a nurse and a paramedic that went through basic kind of helicopter indoctrination and understanding helicopters and understanding the important things to look at for like a recon, and having them help me as the pilot when we're doing off airports, when we're coming into a tight LZ. And, I think later on I can share some stories about how those people in the backseat, I think, actually might have saved my bacon a couple of times. So I think it's as
nice.
simple as everyone has a responsibility in the aircraft to kind of be aware of what's going on, whether you're trained or not trained.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
it's one of the things, sorry, John, I've been actually blessed throughout my entire career that I've always been part of an entire, I've always been part of an entire crew. So I've always had to incorporate CRM. It wasn't until I came into more of the civilian sector and pilots had started coming on to my world of search and rescue and hoist operations where they were like, hey, you don't talk in the back. And I'm like, on the contrary, my friend, yeah. I talk a lot and you want me to be talking in the back of the aircraft. So it was kind of funny that I had to flip it. Because again, you got guys, single pilot or just 2 pilots up front that are not used to having the crew in the back. And again, I'll tell you what, I know you guys can land the helicopter. I know that. I know you don't need my help to land the helicopter. But, Halsey, you said it. It's an extra set of eyes to say, hey, yeah, everything's clear. You're clear down, whatever. Especially in like a remote area or a non-landing zone or whatever. So.
Well, I know like the 407 has like a backup camera now, like the GX, but most helicopters have very poor visibility from the pilot perspective of behind, left, right. You have very limited field of view, especially during night operations. So being able to have that person in the back kind of serve as that backup camera. I use it for my car. Might as well use it for the helicopter as well.
Yeah.
The car.
CRM doesn't. Yeah, you don't want to hear that.
It's like it's like your pilot's like, hey, Quinny, we need you to stop talking, but can you give me a series of beeps that intensify as I'm getting closer?
We might be onto something there. Go ahead, John.
CRM doesn't happen by accident, and when you get a new partner, it's incumbent upon you as either the pilot, or if you're not the pilot, if you're in Quinny's role or someone else, to initiate those conversations to where you do work effectively together. Because like Halsey, like you said, 4 eyes is better than 2, or 6 eyes is better than 2. However many people are part of that crew, it's really important, and not just visually. It's being aware of what's happening in the flight. If you've got an emergency procedure, if you're a TFO or you're a crew member, you have every right, just like anybody else to grab that emergency, the procedure, and go through that checklist as that thing happens. God forbid, we experience that, and we will at some point. But it's so important, I think, to have, more brains and more eyes working to make the effectiveness of each mission possible,
I'm
Absolutely.
curious too, Jason, from your perspective, since you've been working more in the back of the aircraft and I've been more in the front of the aircraft. I've always tried as a pilot, when I did my couple years at Air Medical, when I actually had a crew, I always tried to really brief about my expectations of how we can work together, right? How I'm incorporating them within this helicopter and how we all have a responsibility to keep each other safe. But I'm guessing that you've probably experienced maybe both pilots that want to include you and pilots that don't want to include you. And I would be curious to kind of hear an experience of when a pilot was maybe trying not to include you and how you were able to effectively communicate the importance of like, hey, dude, I'm here to help. I'm here to be part of this team. Because I feel like that could be hard to navigate, and maybe hearing it from your perspective could help some of at least my listeners understand the importance of making sure that we're doing good briefs and making sure that our crew doesn't just feel included, but is actually absolutely included as vital role.
Yeah, right on. I'm happy to answer that. So a couple of things. Let me start with the always included. And that is, every time I've been in a crew that I'm always included in everything, it's always a quick question to the back of the aircraft. And it could be, hey, we're going to fire on the engines, get ready for rotor start. You guys clear the back? Ready to go? Yeah, we're good. Hey, thumbs up. And on the other side of it is I get shut down. The only time that we or I in the back have ever been like, hey, lock it up, is takeoff and landing. Because it's that you guys have so much going on up in front of the aircraft. Get up once you get vertical lift and you get to that translational lift, we're good to go. And now I can start talking away. But in the beginning, that, hey, we're good to go in the back. Cabin doors open, cabin doors closed. We're all secure. We're ready for taxi. We're ready for takeoff. That conversation is on point. At the other side of it, as simple as a startup, I have been standing at the aircraft. My helmet is on the deck. I am standing outside the aircraft. I'm like putting earplugs in, and the engines are firing up. The rotor head starts turning. I'm looking around like, is anybody ask me if I'm ready? I mean, seriously? And then I put my helmet on, like, oh, you guys are starting. Oh yeah, you weren't ready? I am now. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I guess for me, it's that if you have pilots that engage you back and forth, you have that, John said it earlier, you have that conversation. It's easy. It's just like having a conversation like we are now. Like you're sitting in the car, somebody's talking in the back seat. You're like, hey, don't make me turn this car around. It's that fun banter back and forth. You're having a good time. The other side of it, where it's been very difficult, is when you're having chatter and then a pilot up front gets irritated, or something comes over and just he gets overwhelmed. They get overwhelmed, and all of a sudden they shut us off in the back. And now we've lost comms altogether because they just don't want to hear us. They don't want to listen. They've got one radio call every 15 minutes and they shut us off for an hour. I'm like, come on, man. So now you got to go up. You got to tap on the shoulder. Hey, dude, we got stuff we got to talk about back here. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I forgot. No, you didn't. You want to do your own thing. I get it. You've been single pilot, or you've been flying from point A to point B for 20 freaking years. And now all of a sudden you've got somebody in the back that's telling you, hey man, you're not cool. You're not ready for takeoff and whatever. But yeah, so I've seen both. The worst I think I've ever seen was the two pilots I was flying with, they got in a verbal argument. Whatever it was, it doesn't matter. But it was a verbal argument. They were like bickering back and forth. We did an 1.5-hour flight where they literally did takeoff checks, cruise altitude checks, and did not speak again until it was before landing checks. And I was like, at one point in the middle of the flight, I'm like, are we good up front? No, both of them like, yep. And that was it. Like, holy cow.
Yeah.
Mommy and daddy are fighting.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I've been assigned to a partner where it was kind of like that. And you take off and you say what you have to do. And of course, if something vital pops off, you bring it up. But you want a culture that doesn't have that. And that goes back in law enforcement to the selection process of the people that you're bringing into your unit. You don't want that environment to be created. So it's really important for us in the selection process to look for people that, as simple as it sounds, that you'd want to have a beer with, because you're going to be in tight quarters, you're going to be working in stressful situations, and you want to make sure that that doesn't happen, And I think in law enforcement in particular, our culture's gotten a lot better. When I first started, there was kind of a dividing line in the cockpit, and the TFO and the observer, you do the police job, you work the radios, you work the camera, you do that side, and the pilot does the other stuff. The magic stuff happens over here. Don't touch my stuff. Don't even ask about it, basically, is kind of how I felt with one of my first partners. So, fast forward to the end, let me go back to that first partner. I didn't know what upwind was. I didn't know what downwind was, or crosswind, or any of these, basic terms. That should have been one of the first conversations we had, so that I knew, you talk about a sterile cockpit. So I'd know when we go to depart, keep your mouth shut, so that the pilot can make his calls and make sure everything's good, or her calls, whatever. And then, at the end, as when I was the PIC and my TFOs, it was a two-way conversation the whole time outside of the sterile, cockpit part of the flight. But it was really cool to see the evolution of that. And it wasn't just me, it's how the culture's evolved. In law enforcement, it's interesting too, because it's not just CRM as it relates to flight. We're also working calls together. So the pilot, of course, is making sure that the flight's safe. But when the pilot isn't task saturated, we're helping the TFO work their call. Now, it might be a simple radio manipulation. It might be finding a suspect, because a lot of times the TFO is looking at the camera. Got a really narrow field of view. The pilot's looking out the window, so your field of view is really broad. And the pilot a lot of times ends up catching the bad guy, because you've got this really broad field of view, and you're like, oh, what's this guy running over here? Who is that? And the TFO puts the camera over there, and that's him. Got him. So it's really cool. So again, going back to that person I was talking about, we're working a call. It's a man with a gun call. It's a pretty serious call, and there's a bunch of units coming in, and we're now being a pilot, I understand kind of, a little bit more of the role of the pilot in this particular area. Was not task saturated, was not in a position where he couldn't help, just didn't want to help. And I'm asking him for help to help direct units in, because he can look out the window and say, hey, you've got a unit coming up next street to the west. Have him come one street east. I'm asking him for help, and he's like, sorry, I'm busy over here. And he wasn't busy. He just didn't want to help, So, it goes back to, one, the selection process, but two, how the culture's changed over time. So have you seen, Quinn, in your segment, a shift in culture, or has it always been pretty good?
From where I'm at, I've worked in search and rescue my whole career. It's always been pretty good, but it's had to be, because when you get on scene, you're relying on the guys in the back of the helicopter to get the gear ready for hoist operations, long line, fast rope, everything that has to do with the back of the aircraft. We have to have communication with the guys up front. It's you can't not. I mean, I can't be throwing the cabin door open at 120 knots. It just doesn't happen. So all the limitations of all the aircrafts, we've got to have that communication back and forth. So you have that, I'm gonna call it the dance, or your script, you're checking off your script, and it's wonderful. So again, I've always had it. It's always worked wonderfully for me. And occasionally you have a guy that's just like, and you're like, but you make a joke in the back of the aircraft, everybody's laughing, everything's back to normal. So
yeah. Halsey, how about for you on the HIM side, and then as you move forward into the role you're in now?
Well, the role I am now is I write a lot of emails, and I talk on the phone a lot. So it doesn't involve, excuse me, it doesn't involve too much CRM.
Well, not in-flight CRM.
Well, I work with my wife. She works for us, so we have to be strong communicators. But in air medical, I can't speak to, say, 20 plus years ago, but what I've heard, obviously, I think air medical has gone through a lot of very positive changes. It went from kind of a dangerous job where a lot of people were dying, excuse me, and through time, it's become better and better. And I think one of the big things that I always heard from some of the old timers is that they used to consider the crew, the nurse and the paramedic, as self-loading baggage. Essentially, these people that get on the helicopter, they don't know anything about helicopters. Maybe they're arrogant, maybe they're annoying, they talk too much, they don't do enough, whatever it may be. But there was never like this mutual respect of actually incorporating them into the safety of the aircraft, whether you're starting up the aircraft and you're clearing the area, whether you're about to take off and you're clearing the area, coming into an LZ at night, and you're having them help because they have goggles, whatever it may be, it just wasn't incorporated. And so a big shift in air medical has been incorporating the crew into that. And it starts at startup. It starts at right before we take off. There was a challenge response checklist where the med crew would actually challenge me with a series of questions, just making sure that everything up front was how it should be. I have admittedly pulled up the collective on a helicopter before when it was in ground idle, right? So having a med crew say, is the throttle full? It's a good question to ask, right? Especially in an aircraft where, like a 407, maybe not the GXI, but like a 407 or a Long Ranger, you can maybe not be all the way full throttle and not maybe necessarily know it if you didn't check your tack or whatnot. So having that challenge response checklist, I think, is important. And for me, I felt like, I guess maybe it's the person that I am, but I feel like if you talk people up a little bit and you make them feel included, we're all humans. We all have an ego. We all need to fulfill something. I always felt from a pilot perspective, if I include these people, whether they really know what they're doing or not, I feel like I'm going to get the best out of them every single time. And so we would get new med crew and I would kind of hype them up a little bit and make sure that they realized their part of safety within our flying environment, how we all had a responsibility for each other to get home safely, not just the guy up front flying the aircraft. And I think for guys and gals out there that are flying air medical, maybe you're just getting into air medical, one thing that I would really encourage you is to communicate with your crew, do really thorough briefs. I know it can become mundane. Sometimes you fly the same route all the time, but when you start kind of declining and giving a good, post-flight brief, it just makes it easier to do a crappier brief the next time. So I always tried to maintain like the high standard. And I know it sounds like a little corny. I'm like that pilot that's taking it too seriously, but it's serious to me, right? So I would always recommend that. And then I would recommend practice. I would make sure that the med crew, they get like 1 week at the company that I worked for. They get kind of 1 week of helicopter style training, being in a helicopter, NVG. So I would go out and do continual training. I worked for a company, and most air medical companies are this way now. Go out and train. Do, what happens when we're in invert IMC? I can use the guys in the back to help me go through my checklist. What happens if we're in this scenario? So practice, and make sure that if you see that there's maybe a weak link within your crew, that you're helping them. You're not scolding them. You're not demoralizing them, but you're helping them get better. Because at the end of the day, they truly are not flight people. They're nurses, they're paramedics, they're really good at what they do. And so I think it's a pilot's responsibility to make sure that we're incorporating them and that we're also keeping them fresh and helping, with their evolution of becoming a better crew member within the helicopter.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully with the flying in general, your crew members, if they fly enough, they'll start picking up on a lot of your cues. And right now I currently am flying in the 139, right? So the guys will come up and say, okay, I'm just going to pull up power. I'm going to get in that 1-2 foot hover off the ground, check my engines. We've got it. We're going to do a clear area takeoff, power, set, rotate, that nose down, wings level, TDP, wings level, rotate. Okay, we've got VTOS and we're taking off. I think that's all. I think that was accurate. And I'm not even a pilot. But it's one of those things that when you hear it enough as a crewman, you know what to expect in the front. So when things are off, then you can say, oh, okay, that's not right. So you know what? I got a story for that one, because we're doing basic training, just hoist training on the runway, and I think it was for a new pilot, but anyway, we had a gearbox overtemp. So again, we're in the back and I'm doing the hoisting and I hear, hey, we've got a gearbox overtemp. The co-pilot or the instructor pilot, he said, okay, well, let's finish the hoist and then we'll land and let the gearbox cool off. Again, we're sitting over a runway, totally 100% safe. But we finished the hoist, brought the crewman into the cabin, stowed the hook, nice, gentle landing down to the ground, and just sat it idle until it went out. That was it. But everything was, I roger that. Yeah, we got an overtemp. I'm going to finish the hoist and we're going to land. Copy. It was that quick. And everybody had a little piece of it. And then, boom, non-incident. And that's the greatest part about like CRM that works. It's when it's a non-incident. Hey, it worked the way it's supposed to. Boom. So
Yeah, I think when CRM's working efficiently, you're going to be an effective flight crew, regardless of what the mission is that you do. You bring up in-flight emergencies, go in double IMC, or God forbid a incapacitated pilot scenario. You talk about flying with these crew members who aren't pilots and don't even really know what the instruments are. I would always take the time to explain these are some of the critical instruments, and this is like if we go double IMC, this is what you could look at to help keep wings level, outside of just pressing the autopilot button. But God forbid a incapacitated pilot scenario happens, and this crew member has no idea what they're even looking at. So one, this goes to CRM, but two, just general training throughout these flights. Like you talked about, Halsey, is familiarizing your crew with these different procedures and what you could possibly do. So I think that's really important.
And I think I think pilots, we have a responsibility to always make sure that we are advocating for the safe environment. I had a guy on the podcast a long time ago named Eric Thresher, and he came up with this Thresher. I think he called it the Thresher effect. So shout out to Eric. And his whole theory was that when the helicopter is spinning and on, people start doing weird things, even if they're familiar with being around helicopters. So his whole theory is like, hey, look, you can have a med crew that's been, on the job for 10 years. And now once the helicopter starts running, it's noisy, it's loud, it's vibrating. People just start kind of doing weird things. You hear about those stories of people that knew not to walk into tail rotors, walk into tail rotors. So I think it's always, comes about briefing before the helicopter is noisy and vibrating and on. So I think, pre-flight briefs are super important. And then I think when I had crew, man, my head was always on a swivel on the ground, especially, right? I have crew members loading patients. Sometimes we're on a highway. There's law enforcement. There's so much going around. So I'm always kind of keeping vigil. But on that same token, when I'm on the ground and I'm running, say on a highway or something like that, where I need to keep running, I kind of always felt very uncomfortable. And so for me, it was an emphasis point to my crew of like, hey, you guys are responsible when we're on the ground. Please don't let anyone walk into my tail rotor, right? Please keep an eye out. I know we're there to serve this patient, but I don't want to create another patient because the DPS, guy just walked into the tail rotor, because people do weird things around spinning helicopters. And so I don't think that crew resource management, at least in air medical, is just in the aircraft. I think it's anytime that helicopter is running and you're in an environment where safety could be compromised, I think it's super important to make sure that you have a good understanding of what your role is. As a pilot, my role is to sit there, have my head on a swivel, make sure that, I'm not seeing anything that could, cause an issue. And the med crew who's outside, their role is to make sure that no one's entering my rotor disc until I get a thumbs up, making sure that no one is behind the helicopter and kind of keeping that general scene safety. So again, it comes into knowing your role. And if you don't do a proper brief, you may not, or your med crew may not know their role. Yeah,
I like the thought of the ground operations. At our unit, our mechanics were upstairs in the hangar. We had a 2-story hangar. The bottom floor was where the office space was. And if you're on the ground and a pursuit kicks off, we're sprinting up the stairs, running across the hangar floor to the aircraft that's parked outside. And the mechanics were running by the mechanics. And they see us, and they know just, through experience and our relationships that we've built, what we're doing. So they'll sprint out with us, get us started, help that whole process to make the mission more effective. So it does, CRM, like you said, doesn't only exist in flight, it's on the ground too. And again, I think you've got to develop a culture where that happens. That can only happen if it's intentional. I think if you're not practicing it, like you brought up earlier, it's just not going to happen on its own. So my 2 cents.
Well, it's funny you say it's by practice because, all right, let's throw everybody that's in general public that doesn't fly helicopters, doesn't get into airplanes. Let's be in your car. So the majority of people have been in a car. They can drive, they can be a passenger, whatever. Imagine being in the car at a driver's seat, okay? And you're just dictating everything you're going to do. Okay, I'm going to put my left blinker on, looking over my shoulder, going to turn left now, stand by, and left. and straightening back out. And I'm driving forward, staying in this lane until I tell you. People would look at you like, what is wrong with you? But that is exactly what we're telling everybody to do in the helicopter. So if you're moving in the back seat of a car, you say, hey, I'm gonna disconnect my seatbelt. I'm gonna turn around and get something out of the back. Yeah, it's that communication that you don't think you should do, but you need to do. That's it. It's talking about all your movements. That's it.
I don't know about you guys, but I actually, like, in my car, I always find myself like with my wife or something in the passenger seat, like, clear left, clear right. Like, I'm like announcing it. But it seems like that's like makes sense to me. Like, they're like, hey, are you clear over there? It looks like it's clear. You know, it's like I feel like I'm announcing clearing turns in my car. It's I think it's a positive transfer from flying helicopters, bringing it to the old Kia Telluride. Yeah.
But one thing else you brought up, how everybody acts differently when the helicopter's on, which lends to the fact you've got to be very intentional with everything you do. And because of that fact, you've got to be very intentional. I think that's why we say what we're doing out loud. So it fights complacency, right? So like, you're clearing turns, you're doing all the things so that other people can know what you're doing and help, with that part of the mission. So, again, just kind of going back to the fact that we're just talking, communicating that is super important. So
we're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors.
Breeze Eastern. For over 80 years, Breeze Eastern has designed and manufactured battle-proven aerial rescue hoists, winches, and cargo hooks. Each product is carefully crafted to support demanding mission scenarios, ensuring the job gets done safely and efficiently. Visit them today at www.breeze-eastern.com.
I'll throw one more thing out there too, especially as a guy in the back. One of the nice things that they have nowadays is wireless ICS. There's a couple agencies out there that have the system, or a couple of companies that make a system that use it. Axness being one of them, TrueLink being another. But to be on the ground and to be a part of the conversation in the air is, it's a game changer for anybody that's not ever tried it or used it, because you can literally be a part of a conversation and you don't have to say a thing. A lot of times I'll be in the air and I'll be talking to the guy on the ground. I'll say, hey man, did you get all that? A simple thumbs up. And I'm like, yeah, he's good. Or reverse it. I'm on the ground. They've got stuff going on in the air. The winds have changed. There's an emergency, whatever. And it's, hey, this is what's going on. Quinn, are you good? A little thumbs up. And okay, he's copied that, and boom, they leave. Hey, we need fuel. We're taking off. We'll be right back. Whatever. So having ICS in that crew resource management all the way to the guy on the ground, including wireless ICS, is amazing. And it's technology that's out there that I recommend for anybody and everybody. So
yeah, I think, and that's one of the beautiful things about technology, is that it increases. I think that there's only going to be continued enhancements in overall safety, including things like that. I mean, go figure, it makes sense. Like, it would be so nice if that guy on the ground could hear what we're talking about, right? Like, it's like such a novel idea, and it's awesome to hear that technology actually exists. I actually was not aware of that.
Oh,
yeah,
well, then heck yeah. Let's have a conversation about that. Oh my gosh, I love it. Go ahead, John. My bad.
I think about that a lot, like what you brought up when we're starting the aircraft. For us, the TFO is standing outside holding fire watch and making sure that no one's walking into the tail of the aircraft as we're starting. But I'm looking at him, and if he's motioning with his hands, I'm trying to interpret what he's talking about, while at the same time trying to watch the gauges and make sure nothing's running away. So the fact that you don't have to interpret sign language anymore, and you can focus on the gauges while hearing him communicate is really important. So yeah, I agree with you. Technology is stepping in there big time to make our mission more efficient and manageable on the ground. So yeah, I love that.
So one of the things specifically about wireless ICS, I'm going to use the Axness system currently because that's what I'm currently using. So it's just easy for me to relate to that at the moment. But so when I'm on the Axness system, again, I have direct communications, ICS comms with the helicopter. It is brilliant, right? This is all in hoist operations, and a lot more rescue uses that system than anyone else that I've seen. However, I'd be all about having just an EMS crew, especially when you're talking about landing at a scene call. They unplug from the helicopter, plug into an ICS port of an access system or similar, and they're walking over to a patient and they're having a conversation with you on the way, not radio comms, ICS comms. They're like, hey, Halsey, this is going to take a minute. You can shut down. Or, hey, this is going to be quick. Just stay turning. Or, hey, if you want to bring it to idle for a minute, give me 5. I've got to do this, this, and this. And you're like, yeah, roger that. We're good to go. Or, hey guys, we're going to start running low on fuel here pretty quick. Can I get an update real quick? Yeah. Sorry, it's going to be 5 minutes. We were just getting the hand out, and now we're walking to the aircraft. So it's literally a communication, and you can be 50, 100 meters. I think it's like almost a half a mile, depending on the range, but it's a ways that you can hear and talk to the helicopter. So if it's a land, I've seen this too with scene calls where the helicopter will land like almost light on wheels or not light on skids on a guardrail, and the medics jump out to the scene, and then the helicopter backs off and flies around. You can be doing circles and still be on ICS. It's brilliant. So
yeah,
I'm all about it.
That's really cool. And there's been times, John, I don't know what your experience is with patrol law enforcement on the ground. And I don't know if you've ever been in an experience in a helicopter where you've landed on a highway or something. I don't know if that happens in law enforcement flying. But air medical flying, obviously part of the job sometimes is landing on highways and things like that. And I don't know what it was. Maybe it's just the in the state where I was, those cops. But I think that maybe ground patrol units are used to being able to kind of do this and do that, because they have to park weird, or they're not breaking rules, but they're doing things because they can, and it kind of dictates the situation. And I found that when I was at a busy scene on a highway, I was always most concerned about the law enforcement agents. I had so many situations where cars were, a DPS unit would drive like super close, almost within under my rotor disc. And it would be nice to be able to be on comms with my crew still, because when you're just sitting there running, all you can do is like do this weird wave thing, like, hey, don't do that, stop.
Yeah.
So what we always try to do is we would meet with law enforcement, we would meet with fire departments, and we would try to brief them on what to expect on scene safety and things like that. But it does get a little bit hairy sometimes when you're just sitting in this helicopter and you're like, why is this firefighter walking up to me from behind? Or what is this cop doing coming? It's just always a little bit scary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was lucky for my agency and our region. Everybody in my agency and in our region in general is very familiar with helicopter operations. But I think once you get out in the kind of the rural areas, or for agencies that don't have helicopters, they're not familiar with, what to avoid and what to be aware of. That's a big problem. And you bring up the volunteer firefighters. They're doing a community a huge service by being volunteers, taking time away from their families to do the things they do. But at the same time, they may not be familiar and aware of some of the hazards that exist. They're calling LZs for you guys sometimes, and they may not even know what to look for when it comes to an LZ. So, Jeff and I talked about that at length in a couple podcasts. He would always, be very, very critical and skeptical of the LZs they called out. His recons were very thorough. And if it didn't like it, he would just, hey, we'll go to one I'm familiar with. It's a half mile down the road. They can take that patient, transport him a half mile, and he feels better. It's safer for everybody. So
yeah, 100%. I mean, we always, and you're right. Especially in the rural communities that I served, it was mostly all volunteer departments, and I think it's awesome. They're helping their community. They're passionate, but it's not like their main job, right? For instance, I'm a volunteer ski patroller. I work on the hill with paid patrollers. They do, my required commitment for a year is they do that in 3 weeks, right? So like these guys have experience. They're better patrollers than I am because they have that experience. I try my best and my intentions are good, right? So with the volunteer firefighters, absolutely, there's so many situations where if we were lucky enough to even get them on the radio, that was always kind of half the battle. You never just take what they say as, oh, they say there's no wires, there must be no wires, right? Because half the time you'd be like, well, what about the wires that you're standing under, right? Oh, yeah, well, there's those ones. So, I think it's important, again, as a crew, and briefing with the crew and understanding, specifically landing off airport. Hey, what am I just flying around circles, burning fuel? What is the purpose? What am I looking for? And as a pilot, I would always call out, hey, I see this tree's down here. I see that there's this line that seems to run from, left to right, and then it kind of kitty corners off here. I'm talking about it because then they know I see it. And then if they don't hear me say something, my rule was like, if you didn't hear me say it, please, please, please say it. Mm-hmm. And maybe even if you heard me say it, you can reiterate, right? So totally. Knowing what to look for, specifically in an off-airport orbit at nighttime, is so vital for safety.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My last TFO I had, his name was Corey. He was really good. And you talk about airport operations. And earlier I brought up how I didn't know at first what upwind was and downwind was and crosswind. Well, Corey, he was dialed. He knew all the terminology. He knew a lot about the pilot side of the house, even though he's not a pilot. So as we're coming in for approach, he'd be like, hey, you've got the aircraft upwind, like just something as simple as that, or the aircraft on crosswind. He knew the terminology. Not only was he looking out, but he knew the terminology. So again, going back to, including your folks in these operations in a way that makes them effective communicators, teach them the terminology that helps you understand what they're saying and vice versa. So I think that's critical.
100%. I personally feel, fellas, that we've done a good job at kind of sharing our experience on CRM. I'm curious if you guys are open to chatting about some other topics, some cool things that maybe you've been doing in your podcast, and maybe I can share some cool stuff from my podcast as well, and kind of transition away from the CRM.
Absolutely.
I would love to. Let me throw one more. Let me close this out for CRM. And this was the same brief that I would give at any point in time. The first one would be, if I've never flown with somebody or anybody, don't assume that I know anything and question everything. That'll be the first one. The second one is, if you see, hear, smell, touch something that doesn't seem right or you question it, please let us know. Because if you don't and it is something wrong, then we're going to have a problem. If you do and there wasn't something wrong, I might laugh at you and be like, no, that's normal. It's all good. But at least that way there's that communication and be like, oh, no, that's normal. That's good. Or, holy cow, no, that red stuff running down the window. Yeah, that's not good. Oh, all of a sudden we don't have any transmission fluid. Shit. So right. I'll leave it at that. But I like that. Thanks.
Good closing point.
And actually one other closing point that I have, and you kind of reminded me of it, is I was lucky enough one time to be a part of a flying in the wire environment class. I think it was put on by PG&E, which is a large utility up here in the Northwest. One thing that really stuck with me is that in the wire strike accidents that they had where the linemen survived, I don't remember the percentage, but it was a high percentage of the time. The lineman said, I knew the wire was there. I thought the pilot saw it.
Yeah.
That was huge to me. And I think that was a big takeaway for a lot of those linemen in that class. It was a pilot lineman combined class of, don't assume that the guy up front sees anything. Pilots are nothing special, right? We're just humans. We're limited by what we can see, what we can hear. We all have the same blind spots. Not to mention just other things going on in the cockpit that can distract us. So that was a really powerful message that I took away from that CRM training in the wire environment, is that most of the time the guy in the back saw the wire, but he didn't say anything about the wire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to say it. Cool. I like it. Thanks for that.
On to what you're talking about, Halsey, with kind of transitioning to some different topics. One of the cool things about being part of Vertical HeliCASTS is we get to have conversations with so many different people from the helicopter sector in general. We all kind of have different areas of interest and areas that we cover. So I think it'd be really cool to come back every so often, maybe every couple months, and talk about some of the interesting conversations that have popped up and some of the things that are, high interest for the helicopter community in general. So for you, Halsey, you think back in the last couple months worth of conversations and podcasts that you've been a part of, what's something that was really interesting that you recall as being something that would be worth talking about?
Yeah, so I'm thankful for all of my guests. I've had such an incredible year. In fact, we just finished our wrap-up show for the year, and it was really fun to kind of go down that memory lane of all the amazing conversations. I think one of the cool things about podcasting is like, man, you get to talk to all these people that are usually smarter than I am. And I just get to like have like this free education. So this year has been eye-opening on so many levels, and my guests are incredible. One that stands out, and I think it's kind of controversial, and I was curious of your guys' opinions. And obviously, Jason, from your perspective, it's a little bit different because I don't know if it can infiltrate like it can in the cockpit. But I had a gentleman on, his name is Hector, and he's a part of a startup. He's actually the owner, CEO of a startup called Rotor.ai. And essentially what they're doing is they are implementing essentially autonomous flying in helicopters. Right now they have 2 versions, and I believe it's in a 22 airframe, where the helicopter completely just can fly on its own. You can pre-program everything within a computer, and then it just goes. It does its thing. They've tested it. I've seen the videos. It's pretty incredible. And then they also have a version where a pilot can fly the aircraft from the ground. They can be, in fact, I think we talked about it on the podcast, they want to use it for ag. You know, they could have their pilots in New Hampshire in their headquarters flying aircraft in Iowa, flying ag. So obviously we talked about technology. We were talking about the wireless and how things can actually help safety, and obviously taking pilots out. That's one life that's outside of a helicopter. One would argue that that is now potentially safer. But again, from a pilot perspective, I'm very torn on this type of trajectory for helicopter aviation. And I'm kind of curious on what your guys' perspective and thoughts are. And are we moving towards a world where maybe helicopter pilots are becoming more kind of like an airline pilot, where we're just sitting there and watching things happen? No offense to airline pilots. But I mean, that's the joy of helicopters to me, is like putting this thing on like a pair of pants and flying it. So I'm just kind of curious of what you guys think about all that.
Yeah, I think the helicopter industry is so unique in that, I mean, helicopters are expensive to fly. So if you're flying a helicopter, you're doing a specific mission most of the time. Not many people have the privilege of joy flying helicopters. I wish I had that privilege, but they're expensive machines to operate. And because I think helicopters are mission oriented most of the time, it requires someone to use their brain in that aircraft to make that mission successful. You think about search and rescue, firefighting operations, law enforcement. There are certain aspects and elements within each of those mission sets that could be done autonomously, but I think most of them require an in-flight pilot, someone to change direction, change the course of action. And someone will say, well, what about drone operations? Drones are, in law enforcement in particular, drones are doing the law enforcement mission that most law enforcement helicopters are doing. And they are doing some of that, and they do some of that really well. But, as I talked about earlier, when a TFO is on a mission and they're using the camera, your field of view is super narrow. And you've got a pilot in the other seat who's looking at the bigger view. So you're using 2 different fields of view to search and look for something. And I haven't had that same level of success when I'm just using the camera as when you have a camera or a TFO using the camera and the pilot looking out the window. So I feel like just the basic search for somebody becomes less efficient. I think if you're gonna employ AI in this world where everything's mission oriented, it's got to make the mission more efficient. Where I do see it helping is with the components within the law enforcement mission set. So you take shot over camera systems, for example. They're using AI when you're like, if you've got a victim who's drowning or stranded in the ocean or the water, they can use AI to help identify that person because their body temperature is different than the body of water that they're in. So there's elements that are helpful within that. But I think AI by itself, autonomous flight for the mission sets, isn't very realistic. To switch gears, I feel like when you come to commerce, and there's the ag example you brought up, if you could program the most efficient flight path and disperse that chemical for the ag in the most efficient way possible, that's something I could see being helpful, or organ transportation. In LA, for example, when you've got heavy overcast days where you can't fly, then you have these autonomous vehicles. Bell's got some pretty cool autonomous vehicles that can carry packages of certain weights. You can take them then from hospital A to hospital B, when an aircraft couldn't do it, a piloted aircraft, because there's no visibility, So I think there's certain applications, but in general, I don't see the widespread application and acceptance in the helicopter industry.
I think the acceptance is the key term there. I think we can accept certain portions of technology coming in and embracing it and knowing that it's helping with safety, but kind of eliminating this idea of needing a pilot. I don't foresee it happening, at least in the near future, 5-10 year, maybe as we get further down and technology just gets better and better and these AIs can quote unquote think like humans think, then, maybe things do start to change. So it's definitely interesting. It's an interesting time to be a helicopter pilot. Jason, obviously your mission is very, I feel like you're not replaceable, in my opinion. I mean, is there anything that you can see with the AI ever coming into your environment?
So, no, I hesitate with no. AI can be used in a whole bunch of aspects of search and rescue for sure. The question would be, and I'll even go from search and rescue to law enforcement to military ops, of me flying the aircraft. Like, there's so many dynamics to communication, CRM, from the front to the back, the back to the front. With your holding position, you've got to alter something, you got to move somewhere. I'm running a hoist hook while my buddy's on the hoist and he's giving me hand signals. Like, how do you, I'm sure it's possible, but we have people in the water, we have people on the ground, we have people on the side of the mountain. There's so many moving parts to that you have to be, everybody's got to be in sync. And so everybody's got to be looking at the same thing. I don't see how that would be possible sitting in New Hampshire and trying to do a SAR case out in California. It doesn't equate. And in addition to that, you can go as far as inserting guys with, now you've got fast rope or rappel or your aerial gunner stuff. Like, AI could come in maybe with aerial gunner stuff, but as far as fast rope guys, then you need troops on the ground. You need people there. There's a reason you need people on the ground. So how do you can't take that out. So I don't see
cyborgs.
Yeah. Sir, I'm here to get you.
Yeah. I think most of these missions are so dynamic. You've got to have a lot of, there's a lot of change in course in what we're doing. So it's not fly from point A to point B most of the time. It's 5 different changes from when you take off to when you land. And, I find it difficult to see AI completely stepping in and filling the position for pilots. And I will say, in law enforcement, general operations have been a huge addition as a tool in the tool belt. And I think they complement each other very well. So I think AI will come in and be able to complement what we're doing very successfully.
Yeah.
But I don't see a complete replacement.
Yeah, I lean to agree with both of you on that. John, what about you? You've obviously had a fantastic year with your podcast. Any standouts from 2023 with you?
Yeah, like you said, all the guests that we had in 2023 were amazing. And we tend to talk about people's stories a lot because I think everybody's got an interesting story. Anybody who's in aviation's overcome a lot of adversity to get to the positions they're in, whether you're a pilot or rescue man, whatever your role is, a mechanic. So those stories, it's really hard to pick out one in particular that is really noteworthy. On just the industry conversation, we had a conversation with 2 guys who were F-18 pilots and then became flight surgeons in the Navy. They started their own business. They're called Wingman Med. And I thought it was important because, most of the folks in public safety aviation are in the later parts of their career. And as you get to the later part of your career, you're gonna face a point where your medical's at risk for whatever the reason is, high blood pressure, whatever the thing is. So they've kind of created a way of helping pilots deal with that. We all trust our local AMEs to help us with our annual medicals, but let's be honest, a lot of times those local AMEs don't know a whole lot about aviation. So Just on the topic of medicals, like again, we're all going to deal with that. So I don't know what your thoughts are on the AMEs and the medical situation, but I think it's something that everybody faces.
Yeah, I mean, I have pretty good blood pressure until I show up to that second class medical appointment. I've always found it interesting. I think that you can dive real deep when you talk about medical. I think from a baseline perspective, specifically for civilian flying, I almost sometimes kind of think it's a bit of a joke on just at least my experience of getting a medical. I mean, it's just such a basic checkup. I don't think that you can really actually determine anything really through that. Maybe you can see if the eyes are going bad or whatnot. I think where the industry is falling short, and I've talked about it on my podcast before, is like evaluating mental health. I think that obviously as pilots, you shouldn't really talk about any type of mental health, right? If there's been a past of depression or maybe some anxiety, whatever it may be, it's really a taboo thing. Therefore, you can't really seek medical help and treatment for it. And I think that could really lead to negative outcomes. And I think it has. I think, you see high alcoholism within aviation and pilots in general because maybe they're using alcohol to cope. I don't know. So my stance on the medical is I'm curious as time goes on what the FAA is going to do to better address mental health, because again, we're all humans. We all deal with things. But as pilots, it's almost like you're not allowed to deal with anything. So how do you have that balance, right? So I'm definitely curious and love to hear your take or talk to those guests that you're talking about. I'm sure they have kind of a perspective on that, but it's just, I've always found that interesting.
Yeah, me too. The mental health conversation is a really important conversation in public safety. It's something that we've kind of swept under the rug for a long time, but I feel like it's getting better. But like you're mentioning, I think when it comes to either the psychological aspect or the medical aspect, people don't want to dig into. You don't want to go beyond that medical appointment with your AME because you don't want it to uncover something that might defer your medical. So I think a lot of people push these appointments off and don't want to go to a doctor and see what's actually happening because then it puts your livelihood at risk. So there's a lot of there are a lot of conversation points in there. But what I like that Wingman Med is doing, their thing is if you're safe to fly, we'll help you stay flying. Of course, if you've got a medical complication that makes you unsafe to fly, the FAA is not going to allow it, and they're not going to cover that up for you. But if you're safe to fly, if you've got high blood pressure, but it's being treated, there's ways around that. Like, as we get older, again, we're all going to face certain issues. But I think the biggest thing is just changing the culture to where pilots aren't afraid to go get a regular physical and to dig into the actual medical things that are happening. And like you said, the mental health side of things as well. Nobody wants a deferral. Everyone's wanting to pay their bill. So I think it's a really important conversation. So that's kind of my 2 cents there.
Yeah, I mean, you hear the stories of pilots doing weird things and sometimes even bad things, right? And then it comes out, well, oh yeah, this person's been depressed and had suicidal thoughts for years. And it's like, well, of course he hasn't disclosed that, because if he discloses that, then he's not going to get his medical. So I think it's potentially maybe an unsolvable problem. I hate to say that. I'm just hoping that the FAA is working with the experts in the medical field to better address how pilots can seek mental health as we are all human. And specifically like in air medical and law enforcement, you can see some things sometimes that maybe jar you a little bit. And if you're just a normal civilian like I am, seeing, some guy's leg missing, it could be like a bit of a traumatic thing to see, right? So interesting to see where the medical thing goes.
Yeah, we had a conversation with Jimmy Hatch not long ago. It was our 100th episode. He was a Navy SEAL who was critically shot while on a mission searching for Bo Bergdahl, who is an army deserter. And he walks through his journey with PTSD. And it's a journey that I think just about everybody walks at some point to some degree in public safety. So when it comes to getting help, I think it's super important. Like you said, even in air support as a law enforcement pilot and as a TFO, while you're not on the ground involved in these critical incidents, we're over every single critical incident that takes place. And, that could take a toll on some folks, over the years of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of critical incidents that you've observed and been over. where you got officers down and you just see some interesting things, so I think it's super important. And I like that we're having this conversation just to, I guess, normalize it. I think that's important.
Jason, I'm curious from your perspective. I feel like the job that you do, I feel like you're almost like have to be a professional athlete in the sense of like keeping your body healthy and fresh. Like if our listeners are out there that are maybe interested in doing what you do, this goes along the lines of medical, I suppose. It's like, I feel like your job has to be really physically taxing.
So it's funny you mentioned that. One of the things that, yes, 100%. And one of my best friends, one of my mentors actually says exactly what you said is, we're professional athletes. We just don't get paid the money for it. That's the bottom line. We are required to work out. We're required to lift people up. We're required to swim. We're required to run. You're required to be humping a pack of 50 pounds or 22 kg up a mountain, because that's where the patient is and that's what all the gear is that you're carrying. So yes, what's interesting to me is I don't need the same medical check that you guys need up front. It's only because I'm not at the controls of the aircraft. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I've seen some unfit people step in the back of the helicopter and be like, what? Who are you going to pull out of where? Like, seriously. But for the most part, out of everybody that I've ever worked with, everybody's a physical fitness monster. Everybody's willing to do the drive, go to the gym on their own. They want to work out. They want to stay healthy because they know it's coming. And as my buddy Bob would say, preparing for the bearing. You never know when the alarm's going to go off and you're going to be swimming in the Bering Sea in 20-foot waves. Yeah, that was me too. Like, if you're not ready, man, Mother Nature is trying to kill you all the time. The only thing we can do is be strong enough to be smarter than it. So be ready for when you have it. The other side of that, I'll piggyback off your mental health side of things. That is huge in our world. And I highly recommend anybody just make a phone call, talk to a buddy, talk to a friend, talk to somebody that you can trust for a little while until you can get the help you need. You can call a stranger. You can call me. Call me. I will have a conversation with you. You can tell me that, like, man, I don't feel right about this. Okay, that's good. Keep going. It's like therapy to start talking to somebody. Call a friend.
Mm-hmm.
It's better than
100%.
So
I 100% agree with that. And I've always thought about mental health, and I've done that before, Jason. I've had times where I've been struggling. Maybe there's a loss in my family, or there's just there's an outside stress that I just feel like I'm holding the weight of the world. And whether it's a flying situation or just in my sales business, if I hold that in, I literally start to feel it. My neck hurts, my head hurts. It like becomes this physical stress. And just being able to have a confidant in which you can share things with and just kind of unload some of that, unpack it a little bit. I always find that people, especially if you have the right group of friends and the right people around you, people are really wise, and people have also most likely felt the way that you felt. And so it's really nice. It's almost like sometimes you can feel like, oh man, I'm just so alone in this journey, right? Of owning my own business and being stressed about this and being stressed about that. But then I talk to my friends and it's like, oh, they feel this same stress. Maybe it's a little bit different of a situation, but just being able to have that conversation, I think, is a really natural and healthy way to help us as humans kind of decompress a little bit.
Totally.
My closing thoughts.
One more thing out there. Wait, let me throw this one out there, John, real quick. Is for those that get the phone call. So I'm going to say, Halsey, John, you guys each call me individually. You're stressed out. The best thing that I can do to help you right now is shut my mouth and listen. Just talk. I don't want to interrupt. You don't want to hear my problems. You don't want to hear my story and how, oh, this happened to me. It's no big deal. No. Shut your mouth for 5 freaking minutes. Let them talk. Let it out. Just allow whoever's talking to you to actually talk to you. All right. And that's key, because that's going to help them. And then you can work together, but give them a minute.
100%.
Let them talk.
I'm picturing like your Dr. Evil, like, Scott, zip it, Scott. Zip it real good, Scott.
You even got the bald head to go with it.
Hey now.
It's funny, Quinny, that I'm literally interrupting you as you're trying to talk about not interrupting people, but I think that's a good point. And my closing thoughts on the mental health side, and I'll refer to my friend RJ Garwood. His thing is the 5 mother effers. You've got to have 5 mother effers in your life that you can call, tell them to be at intersection of A and B with a shovel at 5 a.m. and they'll be there in a way that, other people won't. You've got to have people that you can trust, that when you call them on the phone and say, this is what I'm going through, they'll be quiet and they're not going to tell everyone what you're telling them in confidence. And not only do you have to have those 5 people, but you have to be one of those 5 for someone else. So make yourself available. And, when you see one of your 5 going through some stuff, call them out on it. Not in a bad way. Like, hey, bro, I realize something's up. What's going on? Because a lot of us aren't really open and wanting to talk about a lot of the struggles we have. But one of those 5 is going to be in a position where they can, in confidence, ask you what's up, and you should have those. So I love the 5 mother effers concept.
Can I confine something in you guys?
Of course.
And
I have to get to a pre-buy pretty soon.
Okay.
So I'd just like to confine that to you guys. You could do what you want with that information, but I just want to let you guys know.
You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
With me.
And I have the button. I'm the one pressing the record and stop button, so I just wanted
I
to
love it.
throw that out there.
Well, hey, this was a lot of
I'll
fun.
tell you
I
what,
appreciate
man.
you guys
Yeah, I had
taking
a
the time to talk and go through some of this stuff. There's, like I said, a ton of conversations we're having, and I look forward to the next time we get to come in here and roundtable some of this stuff.
I think it's incredible. I think sometimes people ask, I don't know about you guys, if you guys get the same question, but sometimes people are like, oh, is there, like, are you feeling competitive? That are you mad that there's other podcasts on this platform? And it's like, absolutely not. Yeah. I think it's awesome because we all cover something a little bit different. But then I'm hoping in 2024 that we can do more things like this, because you guys have such a wealth of knowledge in what you guys have done, in which I can just never speak about. It's just some things that don't come up on my podcast because it's just not what I've done. Right. I haven't been within 2,000 miles of the Bering Sea. Right. Let alone jumping into it. That's just, it's freaking awesome. Yeah. Right. I've never been in I've never been in law enforcement. So I think to our listeners out there, first and foremost, thank you to everyone, because it's kind of made this HeliCAST platform possible. And just know that as a platform, we are hoping to all continue to come together, not just to do cool, fun podcasts like this, but to also push the envelope of getting better and pushing out better content and working together. So I'm grateful for you guys. I'm so excited for the Hangar Z Podcast and the Real ResQ. And I feel honored that the Helicopter Podcast is part of that platform. So I'm just very excited for 2024 and seeing where all this goes.
Yes, sir.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Me
Feel
too.
the exact same way.
Well,
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, guys. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Right, peace.
Go. Now it's time for me to pull chocks and take off. But before I go, I'm always looking for the memorable rescues that people have done. If you have one that you're willing to share, or know somebody who has a story, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to highlight it here at the Real ResQ. For everybody that is standing by for that SAR alarm, remember, those in distress are praying for a miracle. They are going to get you. So until next time, fly safe and swim hard. Thank you for joining me today here at the Real ResQ Podcast, powered by Vertical HeliCASTS. We'd also like to say thank you to our sponsors for this episode.
Breeze Eastern. For over 80 years, Breeze Eastern has designed and manufactured battle-proven aerial rescue hoists, winches, and cargo hooks. Each product is carefully crafted to support demanding mission scenarios, ensuring the job gets done safely and efficiently. Visit them today at www.breeze-eastern.com.
There you go, buddy. Look, it's like you. Rotor 860. Oh, yeah. Rotor 860. Look, you're learning. Good job.